Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I know you're as excited as I am to read chapters 5 and 6 tonight. What an exciting one 3 and 4 were, weren't they? As we saw poor Tyrion tied to a tree by those awful Calormans, and Jewel was taken away, he doesn't know where, and trees of Narnia are being cut down, and the Kellermans and Ape, that wicked evil Ape, is saying that Tash and Aslan are the same person, that they're neither of them are really real. Oh dear, terrible things are happening in Narnia. And while Tyrion was tied to the tree, he had a vision. He had called out to Aslan and called out to the children to please come and help him. And then he sort of lapsed into what maybe was a dream, maybe not, where he saw 7 people sitting around the table, and they could see him too, and he couldn't speak, though he couldn't tell them what his problem was. But as we left the story yesterday, Tyrion was tied to the tree, and it said that the waking up that morning, the next morning, was about the worst moment that he had ever had in his life. Oh, and we can believe that, can't we? Well, let's dive right into chapter 5. How help came to the king. But his misery did not last long. Almost at once there came a bump, and then a second bump, and 2 children stood in front of him. The wood in front of him had been quite empty a second before, and he knew they had not come from behind his tree, for he would have heard them. They had, in fact, just appeared from nowhere. He saw at a glance that they were wearing the same queer, dingy sort of clothes that people were wearing in his dream. And he saw at a second glance that they were actually the youngest boy and girl out of that party of 7 that he had seen. "Whoa," said the boy, "that took my breath away. I thought—" "Hurry up and get him untied," said the girl. "We can talk afterwards." And then she added, turning to Tyrion, "I'm sorry we took so long. We came the moment we could." While she was speaking, the boy produced a knife from his pocket and quickly cut the king's bonds. Too quickly, in fact, for the king was so stiff and numb so when the last cord was cut, he fell forward onto his hands and knees. He couldn't get up again until he had brought some life back into his legs by a good rubbing. "I say," said the girl, "it was you, wasn't it, who appeared to us that night when we were all at supper nearly a week ago?" "A week, fair maid?" said Tyrion. "My dream led me into your world hardly 10 minutes ago." "Oh, it's the usual muddle about times, Pole," said the boy. "I remember now," said Tyrion. "That too comes in the old tales. The time of your strange land is different from our time. But if we speak of time, it's time to be gone from here, for my enemies are close at hand. Will you come with me?" "Of course," said the girl. "It's you we've come to help." Tyrion got to his feet and led them rapidly downhill, southward, away from the stable. He knew where he meant to go, but his first aim was to get to rocky places where they would leave no trail, and a second was to cross a stream so that they would leave no scent. This took them about an hour scrambling and waiting, and while that was going on, nobody had any breath to talk. But even so, Tyrion kept on stealing glances at his companions. The wonders of walking beside creatures from another world made him feel a little dizzy. But they also made those old stories seem more real than they had ever seemed before. Anything might happen now. Here they are. Do you know who those 2 children are? You know that the last name of the girl is Pole. I bet you can guess what her first name is, too. Jill. Right? And so if it's Jill, and who do you think the boy is? Right, Eustace. We knew that. Yeah. "Now," said Tyrion, when they came to the head of a little valley which ran down before them among young birch trees, "we're out of dangers of those villains for a space, and we can walk more easily." The sun had risen. Dewdrops were twinkling on every branch, and the birds were singing. "What about some grub? I mean for you, sir. We 2 have had our breakfast," said the boy. Tyrion wondered very much what he meant by grub, but when the boy opened a bulgy satchel which he was carrying, and pulled out rather a greasy and squashy packet, he understood. He was ravenously hungry, though he hadn't thought about it till that moment. There were 2 hard-boiled egg sandwiches, 2 cheese sandwiches, and 2 with some kind of paste in them. I can tell you what that paste was. It was either Marmite or Vegemite. That's what they spread on bread in England in those days to make sandwiches. I expect they still do. And when you're ravenously hungry, it's just fabulously delicious. Trust me on that. Marmite and Vegemite, by the way, are yeast extract pastes that are very, very intensely salty. And a little bit goes a very long way, but it's dark brown, and when you're really hungry and you've gotten a sandwich and it's got a thin sliver of Vegemite or Marmite spread on it, and a flask of tea to drink along with it, nothing better. Anyway, if he hadn't been so hungry, he wouldn't have thought much of the paste, for it's a sort of food that nobody would eat in Narnia. But by the time he had eaten all 6 sandwiches, they had come to the bottom of the valley, and they found a mossy cliff with a little fountain bubbling out of it. All 3 stopped and drank and splashed their hot faces. "Now," said the girl, as she tossed her wet hair back from her forehead, "aren't you going to tell us who you are and why you were tied up and what all this is about?" "Oh, with a good will, damsel," said Tirian, "but we must keep on the march." So while they went on walking, he told them who he was and all the things that had happened to him. "And now," he said at the end, "I am going to a certain tower, one of 3 that was built in my grandfather's time to guard Lantern Waste against certain perilous outlaws who dwelt there in his day. By Aslan's goodwill, I have not been robbed of my keys. In that tower, we will find a store of weapons, and some chain mail and some food too, though not much more than dried biscuit probably. There also we can lie safe while we make our plans. And now, pray tell me, who are you? And tell me your story." "I'm Eustace Scrubb, and this is Jill Pole," said the boy, "and we were here once before, ages and ages ago, more than a year ago by our time, and there was a chap called Prince Rilian, and they were keeping this chap underground, and Puddleglum put his foot in—" "Oh, no," said Tirian. "Then you are that Eustace and that Jill who rescued King Rilian from his long enchantment?" "Yes, that's us," said Jill. "So he's King Rilian now, is he? Of course he would be. I forgot." "No," said Tirian. "I am the 7th in descent from him. He has been dead for over 200 years. Jill made a face. "Ah," she said, "that's the horrible part about coming back to Narnia." But Eustace went on. "Well, now that we know who you are, sire," he said, "now you know who we are, sire," he said, "and it was like this. The professor and Aunt Polly had got all of us friends from Narnia together." "I don't know those names, Eustace," said Tirian. "Well, they are the 2 that came into Narnia at the very beginning, on the day that the animals learned to talk." "By the lion's mane," said Tirian, "those 2, the Lord Diggory and the Lady Polly, from the dawn of the world, and still alive in your country. The wonder and the glory of it. But tell me more, tell me." "Well, she isn't really our aunt, you know," said Eustace. "She's Miss Plummer, but we call her Aunt Polly. Well, those 2 got us all together, partly just for fun, so that we could have a good talk about Narnia, because, of course, there's no one else that we can ever talk to about things like that. But partly because the professor had a feeling that we were somehow wanted over here. Well, then you came in like a ghost or who knows what, and nearly frightened us out of our wits, and vanished without saying a word. After that, we knew for certain that something was up. The next question was, how to get here. You can't just get here by wanting to. So we talked, and at last the professor said the only way would probably be by using the magic rings. It was by those rings that he and Aunt Polly got here long, long ago when they were just kids, before we younger ones were even born. But the rings had all been buried in a garden of a house in London. That's our big town, sire. And the house had been sold. So then the problem was how to get them. You'll never guess what we did in the end. Peter and Edmund, that's the High King Peter, the one who spoke to you, went up to London to get into the garden from the back early in the morning before the people were up. They were dressed like workmen, so that if anyone did see them, it would look like they had come to do something about the drains. I wish I had been with them. It must have been glorious fun. And they must have succeeded, for the next day Peter sent us a telegram, and he said he'd gotten the rings. And the day after that was the day Pole and I had to go back to school. We're the only ones who are still in school, and we're both at the same one. So Peter and Edmund were to meet us at a place on the way back to school and hand over the rings. It had to be two who were going to Narnia, you see, because the older ones couldn't come again. So we got into the train. That's a thing people travel on in our world, lots of wagons chained together. And the professor and Aunt Polly and Lucy came with us. We wanted to stay together as long as we could. Well, there we were in the train. And we were just getting to the station where the other ones were to meet us. And I was looking out of the window to see if I could see them when suddenly there was the most frightful jerk and a noise. And there we were in Narnia, and there was your Majesty tied up to a tree. So you never used the rings? Said Tyrion. No, we never even saw them, said Eustace. Aslan did it all for us in his own way without any rings. But the High King Peter has them, said Tyrion. Yes, but we don't think that he can use them. When the other two Pevensies, King Edmund and Queen Lucy, were last here, Aslan said that they would never come to Narnia again. And he said something of the sort to the High King, too, only longer ago. You'd be sure he'd be here like a shot if he were allowed. Gosh, said Eustace, it's getting hot in this sun. Are we nearly there, sire? Look, said Tyrion, and he pointed, and not many yards away, the gray battlements rose above the treetops. And after a minute's more walking, they came out into a grassy space. A stream ran across it, and on the far side of the stream stood a squat, square tower, with a very few and narrow windows and one heavy-looking door in the wall that faced them. There we are. There's the square tower. You can see the heavy door there, just a few windows, and those ziggy-zaggy things on the top are called the battlements. And the pattern down there is called crenellations, if you ever hear that word again. Crenellations are the up and down parts where the people shooting arrows can crouch down and put their bow resting on the little down section, and then anybody shooting at them would be very unlikely to hit them because the arrows wouldn't go through the little narrow slot there. They'd just bounce off the higher parts. Crenellations on the battlements. Your vocabulary is increasing every day, isn't it? Tyrion looked sharply this way and that way to make sure that no enemies were in sight. Then he walked up to the tower and stood still for a moment, fishing up his bunch of keys, which he wore inside his hunting dress on a narrow silver chain around his neck. It was a nice bunch of keys he brought out, for 2 were golden and many were richly ornamented. You could see at once that these were keys for opening solemn and secret rooms in palaces, or chests or caskets of sweet-smelling wood that contained royal treasures. But the key which he now put in the lock of the big door was a plain and more rudely made key. The lock was stiff, and for a minute Tyrion began to be afraid that he would not be able to turn it. But at last he did, and the door swung open with a sullen creak. "Welcome, friends," said Tyrion. "I fear this is the best palace that the King of Narnia can now offer to his guests." Tyrion was pleased to see that the 2 strangers had been well brought up, and they said, "Oh, please don't mention it," and that they were sure it would be very nice. As a matter of fact, it wasn't particularly nice. It was rather dark and smelled very damp. There was only one room in it, and this room went right up to the stone roof. A wooden staircase in one corner led up to a trap door by which you could get out onto the battlements. There were a few rude bunks to sleep in, and a great many boxes and lockers and bundles. There was also a hearth which looked like no one had lit a fire in it for a great many years. "We'd better go out and gather some firewood first thing, hadn't we?" said Jill. "Not yet," said Tyrion. He was determined that they should not be caught unarmed, and he began searching the lockers. Thankfully, remembering that he had always been careful to have these garrison towers inspected once a year and to make sure that they were stocked with all things needful. The bowstrings were there in their coverings of oiled silk. The swords and spears were greased against rust, and the armor was kept bright in its wrappings. But there was something even better. "Look," said Tyrion, as he drew out a long chainmail shirt of a curious pattern and flashed it before the children's eyes. "That is strange-looking mail," said Sire. "Sire," said Eustace. Here's Eustace holding up this strange chainmail that he's got there. You can see the shelves and the boxes and all the stuff that Tyrion has been explaining to them. "That's funny-looking chainmail, sire," said Eustace. "Aye, lad," said Tyrion. "No Narnian dwarf smith that. This is chainmail from Calormen. Outlandish gear. I have always kept a few suits of it in readiness, for I never knew when I or my friends might have reason to walk unseen in the Tisrock's land. And look on this stone bottle. In it there is a juice which, when we have rubbed it on our hands and our faces, will make us as brown as the Calormens." "Oh, hurrah!" said Jill. "Disguises! I love disguises." Tyrion showed them how to pour out a little of the juice into the palms of their hands and then rub it over their faces and necks, right down to the shoulders, and then on their hands right up to the elbows, and he did the same himself. "After this is hardened on us," he said, "we may wash it in water and it will not change. Nothing but oil and ashes will make our skins back to Narnian color again. And now, sweet Jill, let us see how this mail shirt becomes you. It's a bit too long, yet not as bad as I feared. Doubtless it belonged to a young page in the train of one of their Tarkans." After the mail shirts, they put on the Calormene helmets, which are little round ones, fitting tight to the head and having a spike on top. Then Tyrion took some long rolls of some white stuff out of a locker and wound it around and around the helmets until they became turbans, but the little steel spike still stuck up in the middle. He and Eustace took curved Calormene swords and little round shields. There was no sword light enough for Jill, but he gave her a long, straight hunting knife, which might do for a sword in a pinch. "Do you have any skill with the bow, maiden?" said Tyrion. "Nothing worth talking about," said Jill, blushing. "Scrub's not bad, though." "Don't you believe her, sire," said Eustace. "We've both been practicing archery ever since we got back from Narnia last time, and she's about as good as me now. Not that either of us is that good." So Tyrion gave Jill a bow and a quiver full of arrows. The next business was to light a fire, for inside that tower it still felt more like a cave than like anything indoors, and it set one shivering. But they got warm gathering the wood. The sun was now at its highest, and when once the blaze was roaring up the chimney, the place began to look quite cheerful. Dinner, however, was a pretty dull meal, for the best they could do was to pound up some of the hard biscuits they found in a locker, and pour them into boiling water with salt to make a kind of porridge. And of course there was nothing to drink but water. "I wish we'd brought a packet of tea," said Jill. "Or a tin of cocoa," said Eustace. "A bottle or two of good wine in either of these towers would not have been amiss," said Tyrion. Chapter 6, A Good Night's Work. About 4 hours later, Tyrion flung himself into one of the bunks to catch a little sleep. The two children were already snoring. He had made them go to bed before he did because they would have to be up most of the night, and he knew that at that age they couldn't do without their sleep. Also, he had tired them out. First, he had given Jill some practice in archery and found that, though not up to Narnian standards, she really wasn't too bad. Indeed, she had succeeded in shooting a rabbit. Not a talking rabbit, of course. There are lots of the ordinary kind about in the western parts of Narnia. And it was already skinned, cleaned, and hanging up. He had found that both the children knew all about this chilly and smelly job. They had learned that kind of thing on their great journey through Giant Land in the days of Prince Rilian. Then he had tried to teach Eustace how to use his sword and shield. Eustace had learned a lot about sword fighting in his earlier adventures, but that had all been with a straight Narnian sword. He had never handled a curved Calormene scimitar, and that made it hard, for many of the strokes are quite different, and some of the habits he had learned with the long sword had to be unlearned again. But Tyrion found that he had a good eye and was quick on his feet. He was surprised at the strength of both children. In fact, they both seemed much bigger and stronger and more grown up than they had been when he met them just a few hours ago. It's one of the effects that Narnian air often has on visitors from our world. All three of them agreed that the very first thing they must do was to go back up to Stable Hill and try to rescue Jewel the unicorn. After that, if they succeeded, they would try to get away eastward and meet the army that Runewit the Centaur would be bringing from Cair Paravel. An experienced warrior and huntsman like Tyrion can always wake up at any time he wants. So he gave himself until 9 o'clock that night, put all worries out of his head, and fell asleep at once. It seemed only a moment later when he woke, but he knew by the light and by the very feel of things that he had timed his sleep exactly. He got up, put on his helmet and turban. He had slept in his chainmail shirt, and then shook the other two until they woke up. They looked, to tell the truth, very gray and dismal as they climbed out of their bunks, and there was a good deal of yawning. "Now," said Tyrion, "we go due north from here. By good fortune, it's a starry night, and it will be a much shorter journey than our journey this morning, for we went roundabout, but now we shall go straight. And if we are challenged, then you two hold your peace, and I will do my best to talk like a cursed, cruel, powerful lord of Calormen. If I draw my sword, then you, Eustace, must do the same, and let Jill jump behind us and stand with an arrow on her string. But if I cry, 'Home,' then run back to the tower as quickly as you can, both of you. And don't let any of you fight on, not even a one stroke after I have given the retreat. Such false valor has spoiled many notable plans in the wars. And now, my friends, in the name of Aslan, let us go forward." Out they went into the cold night. All the great Narnian stars were burning above the treetops. The North Star of that world is called the Spearhead, and it is much brighter than our North Star. For a time, they could go straight toward the Spearhead, but presently they came to a dense thicket, so that they had to go out of their course to get around it. After that, for they were still surrounded by branches, it was hard to pick up their bearings, but it was Jill who got them on the right track again. She had been an excellent Girl Scout in England. And now, of course, she knew her Narnian stars perfectly, too, having traveled so much in the wild northern lands, and she could work out directions from the other stars even when the Spearhead was hidden. As soon as Tyrion saw that she was the best pathfinder of the three of them, he put her in front. And then he was quite astonished to find out how silently and almost invisibly she glided on before them. "By the lion's mane," he whispered to Eustace, "this girl is a wonderful wood maid. If she has Dryad's blood in her, she could hardly do better." "She's so small, that's what helps," whispered Eustace. But Jill in front said, "Shh, less noise." All around them, the wood was very quiet. Indeed, it was far too quiet. On an ordinary Narnian night, there ought to have been noises. An occasional cheery "good night" from a hedgehog, the cry of an owl overhead, perhaps a flute in the distance to tell of fauns dancing, or some hammering noises from dwarfs underground. All of that was silenced. Gloom and fear reigned over Narnia. After a time, they began to go steeply uphill, and the trees grew further apart. Tyrion could dimly make out that well-known hilltop and the stable. Jill was now going with more and more caution. She kept on making signs to the others with her hand to do the same. Then she stopped dead still, and Tyrion saw her gradually sink down into the grass and disappear without a sound. A moment later she rose again, put her mouth close to Tyrion's ear, and said in the lowest possible whisper, "Get down, you can see better." She said "thee" instead of "see," not because she had a lisp, but because she knew that the hissing letter S is the part of a whisper that is most likely to be overheard. Tyrion at once lay down, almost as silently as Jill, but not quite, for he was heavier and older. And once they were down, he saw that from that position you could see the edge of the hill sharp against the star-strewn sky. Two black shapes rose up against it. One was the stable, and the other, a few feet in front of it, was a Calormene sentry. He was keeping very ill watch, not walking or even standing, but sitting with his spear over his shoulder and his chin on his chest. Here they are, looking up at the stable, and there's the Calormene guy just kind of sprawled out there in front of them. "Well done," said Tyrion to Jill. She had told him exactly what he needed to know. They got up, and now Tyrion took the lead. Very slowly, hardly daring to breathe, they made their way up to a little clump of trees that was not 40 feet from where the sentinel was standing. Where he was lying. "Wait here till I come again," he whispered to the other two. "If anything goes wrong, you run." Then he sauntered out boldly in full view of the enemy. The man jumped when he saw him, but he was afraid Tyrion might be one of his own officers and that he would get into trouble for lying down. But before he got up, Tyrion had dropped down on one knee beside him, saying, "Are you a warrior of the Tisrocs? May he live forever? It cheers my heart to meet you here among all these beasts and devils of Narnia. Give me your hand, friend." And before he knew what was happening, the Calormene sentry found his right hand seized in a mighty grip. Next instant, someone was leaning on his legs and a dagger was pressed against his neck. "One noise and you are dead," said Tyrion in his ear. "Tell me where the unicorn is and you'll live." Behind the stable, oh my master," stammered the unfortunate man. "Good. Rise up and lead me to him." As the man got up, the point of the dagger never left his neck. It only traveled around, cold and rather ticklish, as Tyrion got behind him and settled it at a convenient place under his ear. Trembling, he went around to the back of the stable. Though it was dark, Tyrion could see the white shape of Jewel at once. "Hush," he said. "No, do not neigh. Yes, Jewel, it is I. How have they tied you?" "I'm hobbled by all 4 legs and tied with a bridle to a ring in the stable wall," whispered Jewel. "You stand here, sentry, with your back to the wall. Just like that. Now, Jewel, set the point of your horn against this Calormen's breast." "With a good will, sire," said Jewel. "If he moves, stab him to the heart." Then, in a few seconds, Tyrion cut the ropes, and with the remains of them he bound the sentry hand and foot, made him open his mouth, stuffed it full of grass, and tied him up so that he could make no noise, lowered him into a sitting position, and set him against the wall. "I have done you some discourtesy, soldier," said Tyrion, "but it was because I was in need. But if we meet again, I hope I can do you a better turn. Now, Jewel, let us go softly." He put his left arm around the beast's neck and bent and kissed his nose, and both had great joy. They went back as quietly as possible to the place where he had left the children. It was darker there under the trees, and he nearly ran into Eustace before he saw him. "All is well," whispered Tyrion. "A good night's work. Now for home." They turned and had gone a few paces when Eustace said, "Where are you, Pole?" There was no answer. Is Jill on the other side of you, sire? He asked. What? Is she not on the other side of you? It was a terrible moment. They dared not shout, but they whispered her name in the loudest whispers they could manage, and there was no reply. Did she go from you while I was away? Asked Tyrion. I didn't see her or hear her go, but she could have gone without my knowing. She can be as quiet as a cat. You've seen that for yourself. But at that moment, a far-off drumbeat was heard. Jewel moved his ears forward. Dwarves, he said. And treacherous dwarves, enemies as likely as not, muttered Tyrion. And here comes something on hoofs much closer, said Jewel. The two humans and the unicorn stood dead still. There were now so many different things to worry about that they didn't know what to do. The noise of the hoofs came steadily nearer. And then, quite close to them, a voice whispered, Hello, are you all there? Thank heaven it was Jill's. Where the devil have you been to? Said Eustace in a furious whisper, for he had been very frightened. In the stable, gasped Jill. But it was the sort of gasp that you give when you're struggling not to laugh. Oh, you think it's funny, do you? Well, all I can say is, have you got Jewel, sire? Said Jill. Yes, here he is. Well, what is that beast with you? That's him, said Jill, but let's be off homeward before anyone wakes up. And there came again that little explosion of laughter. The others obeyed at once, for they had already lingered long enough in that dangerous place, and the dwarf drums seemed to be getting a little nearer. It was only after they had been walking southward for several minutes that Eustace said, Got him? What do you mean? The false Aslan, said Jill. What? Said Tyrion. Where have you been, and what have you done? Well, sire, said Jill, as soon as I saw that you got that sentry out of the way, I thought that maybe I would have a look in the stable and see what really is in there. So I crawled along, and it was as easy as anything to draw the bolt. Of course, it was pitch black inside, and it smelled like any other stable. And then I struck a match, and would you believe it? But there's nothing in there but this old donkey with a bundle of lion skin tied on his back. So I drew my knife and told him he'd have to come along with me. As a matter of fact, I needn't have threatened him with a life at all. He was very fed up with the stable and quite ready to come. Weren't you, Puzzle dear? Great Scott, said Eustace. Well, I'm jiggered. I was jolly angry with you a minute ago, and I still think it was mean of you to sneak off without the rest of us, but I admit, I mean to say, that was a perfectly gorgeous thing to do. If she were a boy, she'd have to be knighted, wouldn't she, sire? If she were a boy, said Tyrion, she'd be whipped for disobeying orders. And in the dark, no one could tell whether he was saying this with a frown or a smile. But the next minute was the sound of rasping metal. What are you doing, sire? Asked Jewel sharply. I'm drawing my sword off to smite off the head of that accursed donkey, said Tyrion in a terrible voice. Stand clear, dear. Stand clear, girl. Oh, please don't, said Jill. Really, you mustn't. It wasn't his fault. It was all the ape. He didn't know any better, and he's very sorry. He's a nice donkey. His name is Puzzle, and I've got my arms around his neck. Jill, said Tyrion, you are the bravest and most wood-wise of all my subjects, but also the most disobedient. Well, let the donkey live. What do you have to say for yourself, donkey? Me, sire, said the donkey's voice. I'm sure I'm very sorry if I've done anything wrong. The ape said that Aslan wanted me to dress up like that, and I thought he would know. I'm not clever like him. I only did what I was told. It wasn't fun for me living in that stable. I don't even know what's been going on outside. He never let me out, except for a minute or two at night, and some days they forgot to give me any water. Sire, said Jewel, those dwarfs are coming nearer and nearer. Do we really want to meet them? And Tyrion thought for a moment, and then suddenly he gave a great laugh out loud. Then he spoke, but this time not in a whisper. By the lion, he said, I am growing slow-witted. Meet them? Certainly we will meet them. We will meet anyone now. We have the donkey to show them. Let them see the thing they have feared and bowed to. We can show them the truth of the ape's vile plot. His secret is out. The tide is turned. Tomorrow we will hang that ape on the tallest tree in Narnia. No more whispering and skulking and disguises. Where are these honest dwarfs? We have good news for them. When you have been whispering for hours, the mere sound of anyone talking out loud has a wonderfully stirring effect. The whole party began talking and laughing, and even Puzzle lifted up his head and gave a grand hee-haw, a thing that the ape hadn't allowed to do him for days. Here they are as they are walking along. Tyrion at the front, and Jewel, and then Jill and Eustace, and poor old Puzzle at the back with his donkeys, with his lion skin tied around him. They set off in the direction of the drumming. It grew steadily louder, and soon they could see torchlights as well. They came out on one of those rough roads which ran through Lantern Waste. And then, marching sturdily along, they saw about 30 dwarfs, all with their little spades and shovels over their shoulders. 2 armed Calormenes led the column, and 2 more brought up the rear. "Stop!" thundered Tyrion as he stepped out onto the road. "Stay, soldiers! Whither do you lead these Narnian dwarfs, and by whose orders?" And that, my friends, is the end of chapter 6. And we shall have to read the next chapter, which is mainly about the dwarfs. And here they are. There's all the dwarfs and their 2 Calormen guards at the front and the 2 Calormen guards at the back. But we won't read anything about them until tomorrow. Well, sounds like Eustace and Jill have come just at the nick of time and that they're just being a wonderful help to Tyrion. But the danger's not over yet, is it? That ape is pretty clever, and those Calormenes are fierce and cruel. So come back again tomorrow, and we'll finish some more of this book, this wonderful book, The Last Battle. We'll be reading chapters 7 and 8 tomorrow. So bye for now. Glad you could be with me. See you again.